What's up, everybody? We're in Judges chapter 14 today, roughly page 269 in the scriptures. So get out your Bibles and read along. And Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. And he went up and informed his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughter of the Philistines. And now take her for me for a wife. But his father and his mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brothers, or among all my people, that you should take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? This would be very much so today, like, an Israeli saying, hey, I want to go take that Palestinian girl as a wife. Or perhaps vice versa. They're just not people groups that got along. And Samson said to his father, Take her for me, for she is pleasing in my eyes. However, his father and mother did not know that it was of Yahweh, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines were ruling over Israel. So it was part of Yah's plan that Samson wanted this Philistine girl. Then Samson went down to Timnah with his father and his mother, and came to the vineyards of Timnah, and saw a young lion roaring as it met him. And the spirit of Yahweh came mightily upon him, and he tore it apart, as the tearing apart of a young goat, with naught in his hand. He just barehanded tore this thing apart. But he did not make known to his father or his mother what he had done. Interesting here that the spirit of Yahweh came upon him, and he tore a lion apart. It's worth noting here that the spirit of Yah does not necessarily manifest itself as, health, wealth, prosperity, peace, and love all the time. In this particular instance, Samson, who was a Nazarite from birth, is like, hey, look, a young lion. Maybe I'll rip it in half with my bare hands because the spirit has come upon me. So just remember that the next time that somebody is telling you that the only domain of the spirit is that of soft-handed, effeminate meekness, which is inaccurate at best and subversive at worst. Also remembering that meekness, the biblical definition of meekness, is not weakness. It's controlled power and authority. It's the surgical application of power. It's staying my hand when I could utterly destroy you. That is meekness. That is biblical meekness. It is not Joel Osteen. It is not some, effeminate beta male in a salmon polo shirt with an NSYNC headset on, giving us 3 verses about love this week so we can have a great week in the Lord. That's not what it is. And that's very clearly not who Samson is either. As we're about to see, Samson was unafraid of conflict. And in this particular instance, the spirit of Yahweh came mightily upon him, and he tore it, a lion, apart, as the tearing apart of a young goat, with naught in his hand. But he did not make known to his father or his mother what he had done. And he went down and spoke to the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And when he returned later to take her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and saw a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. So he kills this lion, goes and takes this girl. On his way back, he's like, hey, I got to see what's up with this lion. Goes and looks, and there's a swarm of bees inside the carcass of the lion, and there's some honey in there. And he took some of it in his hands and went along eating. And he came to his father and his mother and gave them, and they ate. So he gave some honey to them as well. But he did not make known to them that he took the honey out of the carcass of the lion. He didn't tell them where it came from. So his father went down to the woman. And Samson gave a feast there, for young men used to do so. And it came to be, when they saw him, that they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, to these 30 companions, Please let me put forth a riddle to you. If you clearly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I shall give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of garments. So everybody here, all 30 of y'all, if you can explain this riddle, I'll give each one of you a linen garment and a change of garments. But if you're unable to explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen shirts and 30 changes of garments. And they said to him, put forth your riddle and let us hear it. They're like, sounds good. Send it, bro. And he said to them, out of the eater came forth food, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. Out of the eater came forth food, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And for 3 days they were unable to explain the riddle. This very clearly having to do with the honey inside of the lion, but they didn't know this. And it came to be on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, entice your husband to explain the riddle to us, or else we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is it not? They basically said, you invited us here to take our garments because of this riddle. So if you don't tell us what the answer is, we're going to burn you and your father's house, because we're not just giving up our garments, bro. And Samson's wife wept before him and said, you only hate me and do not love me. You have put forth the riddle to the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me. She said, man, you got me in a bind, because these guys are saying, give up the riddle or we're going to burn you and your dad's house down. But I don't even know the answer. You must hate me, Samson. And he said to her, look, I have not explained it to my father or my mother, and I should explain it to you. He's like, I haven't even told my parents. You want me to tell you? And she had wept before him the 7 days while their feast lasted. And it came to be on the 7th day that he informed her, because she pressed him so much. So she wore him out, and he gave her the answer on the 7th day. She then explained the riddle to the sons of her people. And the men of the city said to him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. So they answered. But Samson was aware of the fact that the only reason they were capable of answering was because they had plowed with his heifer, so to say. Had put his wife in a bind. Then the spirit of Yahweh came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck 30 of their men, stripped them, and gave the changes of garments to those who had explained the riddle. And his displeasure burned, and he went back to his father's house. And Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his friend. Let's just pause here a minute. So these 30 guys figure out the riddle. Not so much figure out the riddle, they figure out how to manipulate Samson's wife into giving them the answer to the riddle. So now, Samson's on the hook for 30 sets of clothes, all right, garments. So what does he do? The spirit of Yah comes over him. He goes down to Ashkelon, and he kills 30 guys and takes their clothes, strips them of their changes of garments, and gives those to these 30 dudes who had come to this feast, his wedding feast. And then he goes back up to his father's house. And in the doing of this, Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his friend. He didn't go back with her. He was not very happy with her. So he did not return to her. Because he didn't return to her, his wife was given to his friend. And it came to be, after some time, in the days of the wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with the young goat. And he said, let me go into my wife, into her room. But her father would not permit him to go in. And her father, so she returned back to her father's house. And her father said, indeed, I thought that you hated her intensely. So I gave her to your companion, I gave her to your buddy. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I am blameless regarding the Philistines if I do evil to them. So Samson's pissed. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took 2 torches, turned them tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails, and set the torches on fire, and sent them out into the standing grain of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, even the vineyards and the olive trees. And the Philistines were like, "Who did this?" And they answered, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he took away his wife and gave her to his companion." Then the Philistines went up and burned her and her father with fire. They remembered this girl, and they did exactly what they said they were going to do to begin with. They went and burned them with fire. And Samson said to them, "Though you do this, yet I shall take revenge on you, and after that I cease." And he struck them in the hip and thigh, a great slaughter, and went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. And the Philistines went up and encamped in Judah, and spread out against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" And they answered, "We have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he has done to us." And 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us?" So 3,000 dudes. The tribe of Judah takes 3,000 guys to go after Samson. After he lights all their grains and their grain in the olive fields and the standing grain and even the vineyards, lights all that on fire. They're going to turn him over to the Philistines, but to go capture him, they take 3,000 men. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? Why have you done this?" And he said to them, "As they did to me, so I did to them." And they said to him, "We have come down to bind you and give you into the hand of the Philistines." And Samson said to them, "Swear to me not to fall on me yourselves." He's basically saying, "Don't kill me yourself. I'll go with you, but y'all don't kill me." And they spoke to him, saying, "No, but we certainly are going to bind you, and we shall give you into their hand, but certainly not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him, and the spirit of Yahweh came mightily upon him. And the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. He literally turned these ropes to ash when the spirit of Yah came over him, which we see Elijah calls down fire from Yah as well. There's something to this, right? And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and put out his hand and took it and struck 1,000 men with it. So he grabs a jawbone of a donkey and kills 1,000 dudes with the jawbone of a donkey. When does he do this? When the spirit of Yahweh came mightily upon him. And Samson said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, 1 heap, 2 heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey I have stricken 1,000 men. And it came to be, when he had ended speaking, that he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place Ramath Lehi. And he became very thirsty and cried out to Yahweh and said, 'You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now am I to die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised?' And Elohim split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit came back, and he was revived. So he called the place En-Hakor, which is in Lehi to this day. And he ruled Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines." So we have this back and forth between Samson and the Philistines. It all starts with messing with his wife. And his wife is beseeching him for the answer to this riddle. He gives it to her. She gives it to them. That was a betrayal of his confidence that he had put in her, justly or unjustly, which turns into him killing 30 dudes, which she then, 30 dudes of the Philistines, she then becomes the wife of his companion. He comes back. He storms off, comes back, finds out. And then he goes and sets their grain and their olive trees and their vineyards on fire. And then Judah sends 3,000 dudes to come roll him up. And in the doing of that, he picks up a jawbone of a donkey and kills 1,000 men with it. And then people kind of go, maybe we ought to listen to that guy, or at least not piss him off. And he runs Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Fast forward 20 years to chapter 16. And Samson went to Azah and saw a woman there, a whore, and went into her. And the Azathites saying, Samson has come here. So they went round and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city, and kept silent all night, saying, in the morning, when it is daylight, then we shall kill him. So he goes down to this place, Azah, not to be confused with Huzzah. He goes to Azah and goes and lays with a whore. And they recognize that it's him. So they set up a hasty ambush around the place and say, when the sun comes up, we'll kill him. Now Samson lay until midnight, and rose at midnight, and took a hold of the doors of the gate of the city, and the 2 gateposts, and pulled them up with the bar, put them on his shoulders, and took them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. And it came to be afterward that he loved a woman in Wadi Serek, whose name was Delilah. So hold on a minute. Imagine you've just set up a hasty ambush to kill the guy. They killed 1,000 dudes with the jawbone of a donkey. And at sunup, you're going to strike your ambush. But about midnight, dude comes walking along, finds the gates to the city closed, and rather than opening the door, just rips the gate and both of the gateposts up out of the ground, and just walks along with him and chucks him on top of a hill. They didn't ambush him at this point. They were probably like, bad idea. We're going to press pause on this idea. We're just going to let him go. And it came to be afterward that he loved a woman in the Wadi Serek, whose name was Delilah, Wadi being a dry riverbed, or a small town. And the princes of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him, and find out where his great strengths lie, and see by what we might overpower him. Then we shall bind him and humble him, and let us give you, each one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. So the Philistine princes realized that Samson has got a thing for Delilah, and they say, hey, let's strike a deal here. You find out what his weakness is, and we'll each one of us pay you 1,100 pieces of silver. Sound like a deal? Deal. And Delilah said to Samson, please reveal to me where your great strength lies, and by what you might be bound to humble you. And Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh cords not yet dried, then I shall be weak and be like any other man. And the princes of the Philistines then brought her 7 fresh cords not yet dried, and she bound him with them, while those lying in wait stayed with her in the room. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the cords as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength remained unknown. And Delilah said to Samson, look, you have mocked me and spoken lies to me. Now please reveal to me by what you might be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me tightly with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall be weak and be like any other man. And Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And those lying in wait were sitting in the inner room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. So Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and spoken lies to me. Reveal to me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web. Then she fastened it with a pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the pin of the loom and the web. Then she said to him, how do you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not made known to me where your great strength lies. I'm going to pause right here for a moment, because this back and forth between Samson and Delilah, it's clear that the princes of the Philistines are trying to kill him and are using this woman to try to kill him. But he can't get away from this hoe, as Dudley would put it. He keeps coming back. He knows he's playing with fire, and yet and still, he keeps coming back. Remember, he's a Nazarite, so his hair's never been cut. His 7 locks, we're talking dreadlocks here. We know he's a man of some age at this point. Hell, he's been ruling Israel for 20 years at this point. So, he's at least as old as I am, if not older. Dude's got dreadlocks, 7 specifically, and he can't get away from this hooker. He can't get away from Delilah. He keeps coming back, and he knows that the wages of his sin are death, literally death at this point. And it came to be when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, so that his being was wearied to death. His soul was wearied to death. She nagged him to the point where that he made known to her with all his heart and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to Elohim from my mother's womb. If I were shaven, then my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. And Delilah saw that he had made known to her all his heart. And she sent and called to the princes of the Philistines. She sees it. He means it. What's in her heart? That she clearly understands that he has just borne his whole heart to her. He's just laid it right out. She still calls the Philistines. 1,100 pieces of silver each. Yeah, real hooker, this one. By the way, my dad's name is Sam. And I'm his son. Sam, son. Under a Nazarite vow right now. Imagine that. Just saying. Come up once more, for he has made known to me all his heart. So the princes of the Philistines came up to her and brought the silver in their hand. And she made him sleep on her knees, and called for a man and shaved off the 7 locks of his head. Thus she began to humble him, and his strength left him. This is idolatry. Who should humble us? Yahweh or Elohim? Not some hooker that we know is trying to kill us, yet we can't get away. This is idolatry. And he was stuck in it. He couldn't get away. He was caught in a trap, man. Thus she began to humble him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, let me go out as before at other times and shake myself loose. But he did not know that Yahweh had turned aside from him. And it wasn't just that Yahweh had turned aside from him at this moment when his head was shaved. It was all the trial that came before that. At least 3 other times that are cataloged right here, these princes of the Philistines had tried to kill him because of this Delilah hooker. You think Yah was just close-eyed to that? He wasn't paying attention to that? But each time she draws him deeper in, gets a little bit closer to the truth. And then she plays that, don't you love me? How come you won't tell me the truth? And he falls for it. And he tells her the truth. And what does she do with the truth? She uses it to utterly destroy him. So the Philistines took him and put out his eyes. They blinded him. And brought him down to Azah and bound him with bronze shackles. Just think about that. Just think about having your eyes put out. Being physically blinded in a mechanical manner. Just that right there. And then dragged off to prison. You got no strength now. Your head's been shaved. The Father has turned aside from you, and now you're blind and in prison. Do we even need a metaphor for that? He's been striving you all these times, and you're not paying attention. And now he's turned aside from you, and you've been blinded and put in shackles, imprisoned. And he became a grinder in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. And the princes of the Philistines gathered to slaughter a great slaughtering to Dagon, their mighty one, and to rejoice. His hair's starting to grow. He's starting to get a little bit of that horsepower back. And they said, our mighty one has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands. And the people saw him and praised their mighty one, for they said, our mighty one has given into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, who slew many of us. And it came to be, when their hearts were glad, that they said, call for Samson, and let us entertain him. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he entertained them, and they made him stand between the columns. And Samson said to the young man who was holding his hand, let me alone, and let me feel the columns which support the house, so I lean on them. So he's holding these two columns up. And the house was filled with men and women, and all the princes of the Philistines were there. And about 3,000 men and women were on the roof, who watched Samson entertaining. And Samson called to Yahweh, saying, O Master Yahweh, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, only this time, O Elohim, and let me avenge myself on the Philistines with vengeance for my 2 eyes. And Samson took a hold of the 2 middle columns which supported the house, and he braced himself against them, and on his right, one on his right and one on his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself mightily, and the house fell on the princes and all the people in it. And the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. And his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him, and brought him up and buried him between Sarah and Eshtaol in the burial site of his father Manoah. And he had ruled Israel 22 years. So he pushes these columns over. And when he pushes these columns over, the house collapses and kills them. Kills everybody else too. 3,000 people. It's interesting that they put his eyes out. Remember, why do we wear the Zitziot? Numbers 15, verse 37. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, this is page 158, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them to make tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord in the tzitzit of the corners. And it shall be for you a tzitzit, and you shall see it, and shall remember all the commands of Yahweh, and shall do them, and not search after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you went whoring, so that you remember and shall do all my commands, and be set apart unto your Elohim. I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim to be your Elohim. I am Yahweh your Elohim. speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them to make a tzitzit. And you shall see it, and shall remember all the commands of Yahweh, and shall do them, and not search after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you went whoring. And earlier here, Numbers 15, right around 28, we have this a provision for atonement of somebody who makes a mistake through the high priest. And we'll just read that, 15:28. And the priest shall make atonement for the being who strays by mistake, when he sins by mistake before Yahweh, to make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. For him who does whatever by mistake, there is one Torah, both him who is native among the children of Israel, and for the stranger who sojourns in their midst. But the being who does whatever defiantly, whether he is a native or a stranger, he reviles Yahweh, and that being shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of Yahweh and has broken his command. That being shall certainly be cut off. His crookedness is upon him. Samson knew better. And it was his eyes, after which he went whoring, that even with this ordination that he had from the Most High, this Nazarite vow, he was set apart unto Yah. Even that was derailed by the whoring of his own eyes. And the Philistines actually did him a favor when they put his eyes out, because I don't know if he would have returned to Yah without him. It took having his eyes mechanically disengaged in order for him to remember who he was and where he came from. When we see here in this story that it was of the Most High that the Philistines be engaged by Samson. But who knows what the Father had really intended for that set-apart soul that was Samson. Because we see here that he went whoring and that he died for his sins. And yeah, he took a bunch of them with him. Cool story, bro. We could make the argument theologically was that the Father's will. Well, must have been, because it's what happened. But who knows what the true path, the most blessed path for Samson was. Who knows what he would have walked out had he not gotten sidetracked by Delilah. He was set apart from birth. Was he set apart from birth to go whoring after some hooker and kill 3,000 people by pushing some columns over? Or was he set apart for something much larger than that? We'll never know. That, to me, is the point of the story of Samson. See, the Father's will is going to be made done. It's going to happen. I would go as far to say that that ordination that was on Samson jumped from Samson to somebody else. The Father moved his will from Samson to somebody else. And Samson was the opposite of blessed when that happened, because he went whoring after his own eyes. There's a lot of lessons in there for all of us, myself included, to do what the Father has set us apart to do what the Father has called us to do. I don't see the storyline playing out of setting aside somebody from birth just so they could have their eyes poked out to kill 3,000 Philistines in a catastrophic architectural failure. I think there was something much bigger for Samson, and it never came to fruition because it was derailed by the whoring of his own eyes and some hooker who was just after his silver. So, remember, there's three ways that things get into our body. We talk about eating clean with our mouth, Leviticus 11. Well, eat clean with your mouth, but eat clean with your ears, and eat clean with your eyes. And don't go whoring after your own eyes. Be careful what you put in. Garbage in, garbage out. Be careful what you put in your eyes, your ears, and your mouth. And if you're set apart unto Yah, act like it, or you'll end up in a heap of rubble too. That is my takeaway from the story of Samson. Shalom, y'all.